So our goal in this lab is to determine the molecular formula of water. Spoiler alert, we know it's H2O, but again, our job here is to figure out how we know that it's H2O, not that we know it is H2O. So we want to figure out the molecular form of water, and we also want to balance the chemical equation of the dissociation of water into hydrogen and oxygen gas. We want to balance this chemical equation. Okay, so step one we've already done. We've listed out the products of the reaction, and recall in the middle of the 1800s, it was determined that hydrogen gas is not just H, it's H2, and all oxygen gas doesn't come in the form of monatomic O, it's always diatomic O2. So there's just some knowledge that we can pull from outside sources. So that's step one. Step two is to recall this idea that equal volumes of gases have equal molecules of gases in it. So if we have the same volume of two gases, we know the same exact number of molecules. If we have twice as much volume of one type of gas versus another type of gas, we know we have 2 times the number of molecules. And so quickly we can just write a 2 here and just keep that a 1, because we collected, or we didn't collect, but it's been accepted in science that when you break apart water, you form twice as much hydrogen as you do oxygen. So we'll just take this data. Okay, so step 3 is really the big leap, and that's to say, well, if we have twice as much hydrogen as we do oxygen, maybe the chemical formula of water we know it only has HO, there's no other types of molecule here, and maybe there's twice as much hydrogen as there is oxygen. And so then you just write a 2 there. And so that was the deduction that was made once the chemical formula, the molecular formula of hydrogen and oxygen were known. So now we know, this is how we deduced this, that the molecular formula of water is H2O. It's because there's twice as much hydrogen produced as there's oxygen produced when you dissociate, break apart water. There's one more step. If you look closely at this chemical equation, you will note we are not balanced, because we have 2 H's here, but we have 4 H's here. We have 1 O here, but we have 2 O's here. So we have to balance this out. And the way to do that is, since I need 2 more hydrogens here, I'm just going to put a 2 here. Now I have 2 O's, 2 O's, 4 H's, 4 H's. And so now we have a balanced chemical equation for the dissociation of water, which we now know is H2O. So this may not have been a big surprise or big finding, but recall that there was 2 hurdles that we surmounted or jumped over in this one experiment, and I'm talking like historic hurdles. First, we broke apart water. So just kind of say that. In the long arc of human history, water was assumed to be a pure, unbreakable, pristine thing. We just, in one little experiment with a little 9-volt battery, just blew that idea out of the water, no pun intended. Secondly, this other challenge in the history of science, once it was realized that water was not a pure element, was figuring out the actual molecular formula of water. It was assumed, just because this is the simplest, that the chemical formula was HO, and it wasn't until a few decades after the early 1800s that this was determined not to be the actual molecular formula, and this was determined to be the molecular formula, and it depended on this idea of equal volumes of gases have equal numbers of molecules. So 2 major things were kind of overcome with this one lab. And so now that we've accomplished all that, let's touch on a couple terms that we've been using just kind of casually, but now let's formally define them so that we can use them at will moving forward. And so this, of course, is a chemical equation. The fact that we have it balanced, this is called a balanced chemical equation. And then the subscript numbers here, obviously, you probably already know, refer to the number of atoms that it's next to. And then the third term to touch on is coefficient. And coefficients are the numbers that come before the chemical formula that tell me how many molecules of that chemical you have taking part in the chemical reaction. So 3 terms just to touch on at this point. And one other thing, the science in this experiment is actually super deep and interesting, and a whole subdomain of chemistry came out of this work. It's called electrochemistry, and that's the the relationship between electricity and chemistry. And if you just take another leap of thought and just ask yourself, why would something like electricity, which is seems to be just a physics idea, and chemistry, why would they have anything to do with each other? So if you just ask yourself why they would have anything to do with each other, what answers might come to mind. And what eventually came to mind is that, well, maybe there's got to be some sort of electrical phenomena that's taking place inside of chemical reactions or with chemical reactions. And what would that electrical phenomena be? So eventually, fast forwarding, it was determined that chemical bonds, the things that hold the H and the O together, or even these two H's, or even these two O's together. I mean, why did two O's stay together, not spread apart? It was determined that there must be some electrical forces that are the result of all chemical bonds. And that's also just a profound realization, to say that chemical bonds are electrical in nature. And so that idea came out of experiments like this.